This is the panel on diversity abroad. This is the LGBTQ plus panel, the good and the bad and the ugly. So I hope you're in the right session. So what we're going to talk about today is just what it's like to be a member of the LGBTQ plus community outside of the United States, and how that can sometimes be tricky navigating those environments, navigating safe spaces, and connecting with locals in country, and how that can be, crucial to your mental health, particularly while abroad. So we want to acknowledge obstacles that people face as cultural ambassadors. And it's important to have and the tools and resources to help learn how to navigate uncomfortable situations abroad without compromising safety. So I'll do how the format of this session is going to go. I'll do some brief introductions of our panelists, as well as myself and the assistant for this session. We will answer and discuss some questions that the panelists have prepared ahead of time, and then there'll be a brief Q&A afterward. Okay, and I just got notice that one of our panelists, Ben, who I'll introduce here, is going to be on here in a few minutes. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Van. I'm originally from Arizona, although I currently reside in San Diego, California. And I'm serving as the 2020-2021 Gilman Ambassador Digital Representative, having received the Gilman for the 2018-2019 academic year, where I studied in the northern part of France. While abroad, I was a part-time English tutor, member and co-founder of the Queer Club Unite, and a member of the Aveyron Club rowing team. I recently graduated from San Diego State University with a degree in international business with an emphasis in French and Western Europe. And I am also currently studying for my LSAT and my GMAT exams, with plans to enroll in a dual MBA JD program. My assistant, who's also here, is Omar Taway. He's a Lebanese American. He's currently a first-year medical student at the University of Massachusetts on both population, urban, and rural health track and the global health track. He completed his undergrad in neurobiology, psychology, and human rights at the University of Connecticut, and conducted research as a Fulbright scholar in Amman from 2019 to 2022, where he focused on adolescent refugee mental health. Omar's current research interests include physical and mental health disparities affecting displaced folk and members of the MENA diaspora, and that's Middle East and North African diaspora. He is also extremely over-involved, according to him, often perceived as too politically radical, and spends an obscene amount of time creating art, creating photography that apparently makes people a little uncomfortable. Our first panelist, or one of our panelists rather, is Chris Ayo. He graduated from the University of Maryland, College Park in 2018 with a degree in psychology. After graduation, he moved to Columbia as a Fulbright ETA for the 2018-2019 academic year, and taught ESL as a professor at a public university in Leticia, which is a small town in Colombia's southern Amazon region. After returning to the US, Chris began teaching high school chemistry in the Bronx, and he's currently applying to an MD PhD program in public health. In addition to practicing medicine, he hopes to use his clinical knowledge, teaching experience, and research skills to consult governmental institutions on international health resolutions, and to inform public health policies that ensure health equity for all children. Our second panelist, Ben Brooks, he's a writer and educator from Seattle, Washington. He's taught English and worked on international education projects across Latin America, and most recently as an English teaching assistant with Fulbright Brazil. During his 2 grant periods, Ben led mid-year summer seminar workshops, took over the official Fulbright Brazil Instagram, and advocated for Black voices in the classroom and within the program itself. He spent his quarantine working as an editor and translator, and learned how to make bread. This year, Ben published his first short story entirely in Portuguese, and hopes to continue to write, publish, and pursue a career at the intersection of literature and social justice. And our third panelist is Manny. Manny recently graduated from Bard College with a major in global and international studies. She also studied international relations at Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. At Bard, she fostered her passion for education and public service by advocating for equity in higher education, tutoring students from immigrant communities, and interning in the New York City government and at Bloomberg Philanthropies. Inspired by the impact the education has had in her own life, Manny hopes to pursue a career in education policy on a local and international scale. She is currently a program assistant at Bloomberg Philanthropies, assisting the College Point Initiative, which aims to increase the number of high-achieving, low to moderate income students at top colleges and universities. So welcome, welcome guests, welcome panelists, welcome assistants. And as I mentioned, my assistant Omar is going to be monitoring the chat there for you. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump in on the questions. So I'll go ahead and just direct this first question to Chris, if that's all right. And the first question is, how did your exchange program prepare you, if at all, to travel to a potentially homophobic society?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Correa. I did a Fulbright in Lgbtqia, Colombia. I remember in the very beginning, we didn't have a PDO, a pre-departure orientation in the US. However, we did have an orientation in Colombia in the capital when we first arrived. I remember that at the orientation, I found it most helpful. They kind of gave us sort of terms that we might hear. I know that in a lot of Latin American countries, the term marica is very common, which essentially stems to faggot, what we hear here in the United States. But that was something that they expressed to us is very much kind of like dude we would hear in the United States. So kind of learning those individual nuances at the beginning before going into my actual placement site for me was super helpful. It was also really nice because we had a queer collective in Colombia of other queer scholars within the cohort. And it was very nice to be able to confide in, people who had the same sort of professional interests, but had also gone through a lot of the same personal struggles that I had and were nervous for very similar reasons. I remember that being a nice sort of group that I could confide in.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And then we'll just go ahead and head on over to Ben. If you want to go ahead and answer the same question, I'll just go ahead and restate it. So how did your exchange program prepare you, if at all, to travel to a potentially homophobic society?
Yeah, I had an experience similar to Chris. I did Fulbright in Brazil. So on the formal side from the program, there wasn't like an orientation specifically directed to the topic of safety as it relates to being LGBTQ identified. There was like a general safety thing where, that's like a different part of the orientation, but similarly, we had a really active Facebook group for grantees to like talk about these things. And there was like a queer specific Facebook group. So a lot of the information I got was from that informal side. But once we were all together at orientation, it became this space that we created ourselves in the program. So the program was super flexible to like let us have that space and whatever, but I think that's something that we did as a cohort. So yeah, that's basically it.
All right, thank you. And then Manny, same with you if you want to answer the question. So how did your exchange program prepare you, if at all, to travel to a potentially homophobic society?
Yeah, so hi everyone. As I like think back to my program, there was like pre-departure orientation and in-country orientation, and I did a Bard Central European University exchange program with the support of the Gilman Scholarship. So I don't really think that LGBTQ community, there wasn't really a conversation about what that would look like in country in Hungary, unfortunately. I do think there was a conversation on like what are the politics of the country, but not really like what does it mean to be navigating that for yourself. And I definitely would have appreciated that, but I do think because the experience is different from like a Fulbright ETA in the sense that I was just enrolling into a university abroad, it made the experience a little different in that sense that I think once I was abroad in this community, I think this will probably be addressed in a different question, how being in a university campus is really different than I think just joining a different society abroad, yeah.
All right, thank you for that. I had a similar experience abroad. I don't know if I was extremely prepared. I was aware of the politics in France, similar to you, Manny. However, being at a private university, it kind of changed things up a bit. But okay, great. Thank you so much for that, for your responses. So just moving on to the second question that we have prepared. So were you able to connect with locals and or did you find queer safe spaces, kind of expanding on what you had already mentioned? And we'll start again with you, Chris.
Yeah, I had a lot. And I started as soon as I got to Colombia. So I already mentioned the queer collective that we had as one of our affinity groups. But there actually was a pretty big community where I was living in Colombia. And interestingly, there was a lot of collaboration between the queer community in Colombia, Brazil on the other side of the border, and then Peru on the other side of the Amazon River. So for me, I felt really comfortable where I was. I felt that there were people I could go to, both students that I had who were, if I'm being very transparent, who were pretty much my age, and also other faculty members at my university. So it was a nice support network that I had as soon as I arrived.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And then just to kind of change it up, I'm going to go ahead and go over to Manny. We can go ahead and answer this question. I saw you nodding your head yes. So if you had something maybe similar you wanted to kind of add to that, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely, once I arrived to my university campus, I joined clubs. I also did a little of my own research before traveling to Hungary about like what are the in Budapest at least, what are the cafes and bars that are queer friendly, and trying to visit those places. And I would definitely say that joining like the LGBTQ club on campus exposed me also more to what's going on in the LGBTQ community in Hungary. So yeah, like definitely talking to students in class, joining clubs, visiting, like doing some of your own personal research is really helpful when traveling to a country and trying to find a community.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. I think you just hit the nail on the head there. I think, it's really about doing research. I think like really, you should, or most people do when moving to a new place in general anyways. So just go ahead and moving over to you, Ben, if you want to go ahead and address the same question. So were you able to connect with locals and or find queer safe spaces while abroad?
Yes, I had a similar thing where I did my research, but once I actually got to my site, the city where I was living, it was, you hear things, people want to recommend things to you. So I had a really good experience of like finding out about things that I probably wouldn't have found otherwise, that were like queer businesses, art spaces, performance spaces, lots of cool stuff. So I really lucked out. And friends too, right? Like meeting cool people. And so, yeah.
Right. And I think that's really important. I kind of just want to maybe reiterate or kind of like piggyback on what the panelists said. I found it really important to make connections when you're in country. A lot of things that we sort of maybe take for granted in the United States that like for instance, a business, a bar or something will have a website that will be kept up to date is not necessarily the case as I experienced in France. So having those connections where people know like this club is open, this one's closed, or like what is really actually more friendly or not as friendly. I think they tend to have, a better grasp of that. So that's great. Thank you for that.
And if I could say, could I just add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of tying back to the first question, the same is true like once you once you get to your placement of talking to people, talking to queer people, being like, what's going on? What's the scene like? What's safety like? Like those people may have more answers to your questions than someone directly from your program.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. They tend to be like more tuned in, obviously. Exactly. Okay. Awesome. All right, so we'll just move on to the third question we have prepared here. So what surprises or challenges did you face abroad? And we'll go ahead and go back to Chris for this one.
Yeah. When I think about the entire year, there really was only one experience I had that was kind of, and it wasn't even aggressive. I guess I can just tell you all about it. I was at the gym that was my new thing. Is I was like, I'm in a new country, new place. I'm gonna start going to the gym. That was my new thing. And I remember the trainer I was working with. One day, I was on the elliptical, and we were just making small talk, and he he very casually asked me like, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend?" And I said no. And then he immediately switched to, "Oh, you don't like women." And I said, but it wasn't aggressive. I could very much tell that he was just doing that logical acrobatic and that was normal to him. And then I remember just standing there running on this elliptical like, no, that's really odd. And then I asked him, can I please just exercise? And he was very nice and he walked away and it was fine. But that was the only real kind of, crazy experience that I had. Not to say that I don't know other people in Colombia who were part of Fulbright that had experiences that were kind of traumatizing, because they for sure did happen. But generally where I was living, even though it was a very kind of small, isolated town, the experience was rather positive. But I do know people that had more violent interactions, and those are definitely real experiences.
Thank you. And then Ben, we'll just have you go ahead and slide over to you. So what surprises or challenges did you face while abroad?
Well, I was in Brazil in 2018 when Bolsonaro was elected president. So like kind of nothing that, not in my personal life, but kind of this thing that affected the whole country, obviously, but especially the queer ecosystem, because he was so openly homophobic, and people were really concerned about, what effect his election would have on their lives. So like, so yeah, I think that was the thing that was a surprise. I wasn't super tuned into the election until I was there in Brazil. So anyway, so it was one of those things where it was a challenge that didn't affect me directly, but I think you kind of have to just always be super aware of those dynamics that in your region and how those things are, your country or your city or whatever. And again, like it's totally worth repeating, like rely on those queer people in your community, in your circles, or to kind of navigate that. So yeah.
Right, exactly. I definitely share the sentiment. Okay, and then Manny.
Yeah, so I don't think I faced any significant challenges, just also similar to Ben. The experience of Ben being in Hungary and the storytelling from the queer community of how challenging the government has been, and like making sure the community feels safe in the city, in Budapest and country. So just I felt like I was really there at a time where the community was struggling, and places were being threatened with closure. And so it was just a really unfortunate time to be there, but also interesting because I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was this bad beforehand. And it's definitely something I've taken away about how important it is to ensure these spaces like are supported by the government and communities. And so, yeah, I think that was just definitely one of the surprises I took from my time abroad.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so just jumping into our next question. So what best practices from the exchange program would have been helpful to you going abroad as a member of the LGBTQ plus community? And I'll go ahead and direct this one back to Chris.
I will say that in Colombia, I was overall pleased with the efforts that our local commission made. There were probably 90 people there, both ETAs and researchers, and there were probably, I think when we came in, maybe like 15 of us were queer. When we left, maybe like we'd added 6 new people. It was a really, really fun year. But I think not just within the queer collective, but across a lot of the different collectives. We had one for female identifying scholars. We had one for what else did we have? We had a people of color collective as well, in addition to the queer collective. I felt that at times they would hear us, but they wouldn't actually do anything. Like they would sit at round tables with us and listen to what we were saying. But I remember at our mid-year kind of conference, they brought someone from, where was he from? I can't remember if he was from like the UN or the State Department, but some bigwig. And he came and he like listened to us and we expressed our concerns. They had done this really awful cultural competency presentation during our conference, and we expressed that it was an issue. And I remember they were just, they had open ears, they sat down, they heard us, but didn't actually do anything about it. But not because they didn't have the means to. They had the means to, but didn't act on them appropriately. So for us, that turned into a lot of us kind of taking matters into our own hands. That's kind of what got me into the Fulbright Noir and Fulbright Latinx spaces as well, and kind of saying to myself, I want to be a resource for potential scholars that I know that this organization is not going to be necessarily, particularly in my case in Colombia. But I will say the Colombian Commission, they try, but there's still a lot of work that they can do and a lot of pushing that needs to be done.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. I really appreciate all of these answers. By the way, all of your experiences are really invaluable to helping others, particularly those who are considering studying abroad or interning abroad, traveling to the areas in which you all did. I really appreciate that. So Ben, if you want to go ahead and answer the question, I'll just go ahead and restate that. So what is the best practices from the exchange program that you would have been helpful for you going abroad as a member of the queer community?
Yeah, I think definitely there's that mix of like, how much can you really do before you get on the ground to kind of figure out what's going on. But I do think it would have been helpful to have more like in-person support or like queer meetups or connections or something within our group, because it was like you have basically in my program we had orientation and mid-year, and there were like informal retreats that were organized throughout. But I think it would have behooved me to like put more energy into organizing those types of spaces. So I would say like if you're in a program that doesn't give support in that way, that like I wish that I would have created those spaces more with the queer people in my region, because like we had a virtual community, we had like virtual spaces that we could connect, but we didn't have so much in person. But on the other hand, I did also live in a city that had a lot of queer ETAs. So I would say another best practice is to like see how the program, ask if the program has handled situations before. Like you're never gonna really know exactly, but for example, like has the commission or the entity on the other end, have they dealt with a situation with like a homophobic coworker, or dealing with, or how do they handle complaints, or how do they respond to complaints? How do they communicate in the event of some kind of like, if I bring a complaint to the commission, say, oh, I'm working with somebody who's doing X, Y, and Z, what are the, you know, the processes or whatever, like, it's good to know because you don't want to get like blindsided, I guess. We had a lot of people in our program who left or left right away or had issues like communicating with the proper entities or whatever. So it could be something depending on your region to check out. Those are my recommendations.
All right, thank you, Ben. And then Manny, same question.
Yeah, so I would say my answer is very similar to Ben. I would have definitely appreciated some more resources, but recognizing that my experience was a little different, like I'm not sure if like the Gilman Scholarship Program could pull off a community like that, at least in Eastern Europe, because there's so many Gilman scholars. And I'm not sure like my own study abroad office could do something like that either, because like it wasn't, I would say it wasn't that necessary, because as soon as you were at a university campus, there would already be spaces. At least for me, that was my experience at the university campus. Like I already had a community I could join and have these resources. But of course, it would have been nice to know like what was the club on campus. Like I kind of had to do that self-navigating like work on my own. Yeah, but definitely best practice, like get involved with your community on campus or in town. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I think I concur kind of with what the panelists are saying. I feel like we all kind of have the same advice, right? To do as much research as possible ahead of time, to continue those research efforts once on the ground, particularly, you know, as politics and things change, and also to get connected, you know, once you kind of get settled there. Okay, so just moving over to the Q&A portion, we do have some questions coming here in the chat. So let's see, the first question is, how did you make community outside of other Fulbrighters?
Yeah, I guess I'll just extend a little on what I was sharing with, I think it was Emily in the chat. Yeah. It really depends on where you're placed. In Colombia, there are maybe 25 different placements. I was placed with a senior ETA in Leticia, and like, I love him. He's so great, but we are just cut from different cloths. So we wouldn't like do the same things outside of work. So for me, like my roommate was a Colombian, my friends were Colombians. The people like, and him and I had mutual friends, but the vast majority of my like circle was not people who were in Fulbright or even people who were from the US. And of course I had friends through Fulbright who I would hang out with on like retreats, like Ben mentioned, and stuff like that. And people will come visit me and stay in my house from other placement sites. But it's really one of those things that I think just let it happen. I don't think there's anything wrong with having, you know, a lot of friends in Fulbright or a lot of friends in the host country, you know. I think that's one thing that you should just, you know, push yourself out of your comfort zone and, you know, try to speak to other people, particularly in the host language, wherever you go. But it's one thing that I would just allow to happen organically.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. And just a reminder, go ahead, feel free, anybody if you have any questions, just go ahead and leave those in the chat there. So again, I'll just rephrase the question that we had here. So how did you make community outside of other Fulbrighters, if any of the other panelists wanted to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I would say another best practice that I was going to mention is like, that falls in line with this, is kind of do like an inventory for yourself. Like, what do you need to like be well and like be okay and be happy and whatever. And like, for me, one of those things was like dance. I have to go find a dance class. So I like found a ton of queer people in my dance class. Like, find the thing that you're gonna like doing anyway, and then like see if there are people there, whether they be queer or not, like to connect with, because then you're gonna get engaged into some kind of thing that is exciting. So that's how I met other people outside of my Fulbright circle.
think that's great advice. Thanks, Ben. I don't know if any of the panelists have anything else to say, feel free. If not, we'll just move on to the next question we have here in the chat box. Okay, so the next question is, did you ever seek out therapy specific to being LGBTQ plus or otherwise while abroad? And if so, how did that work out for you?
I can say that something cool that we'd had like a mental health session in our orientation, and someone from Brazil, a Brazilian therapist was there, and she said, get in contact with me. And I know people all over the country, whatever. And so that was a really helpful resource to have that person. And so that's something I sought out. And it wasn't specifically related to identity questions. It was more just like living abroad and wanting to take care of myself and wanting to like have that like a professional ear, basically. So I also, something you could research before you go is like, what is the perception or like the conversation around mental health? Like in Brazil, I was super surprised how open everyone's like, oh yeah, I have therapy today, I can't go to or whatever. Like it's more open, I think. So it was easy for me to ask for a reference. It was easy for me to ask my reference if they had, had queer like patients before, like, so yeah, those are things that you can already kind of think like, okay, how would I go about finding that resource in my case?
Okay, thank you. And then if any of the other panelists wanted to maybe jump in and had some experience, or, again, if you feel comfortable answering this question, please feel free to do so. If not, we'll see if we have some more questions here in the chat. No more questions yet. Okay, well, let's go ahead and shift over for a few minutes and talk about something. So we all kind of had a meetup session prior to the conference, and some other topics came up that maybe you all can speak on until we get some more questions. Oh, there are questions. I am sorry. Yes, Omar, if you could read the questions, that would be great. Let's switch over to Omar for that.
Yeah, I see Chris already mentioned, there was one person that asked, is there any risk in mentioning being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community when applying to the scholarship programs? I think Chris wants to answer that, but then maybe anybody else can touch on that too.
Perfect.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'd be beneficial to get everyone's thoughts. So the thing that I will say about, it's very, very real thinking about being out in your application, particularly if you're applying to a country that you may know is not quite queer friendly. I know that in my case, for example, when I was applying to MD PhD programs, like I specifically want to do research that centers queer people. So for me, writing those essays and responding to those prompts felt relevant and it felt necessary. Whereas when I was writing my Fulbright personal statement and statement of grant purpose, it didn't, not that I wanted to hide it, it just really didn't feel relevant. I felt like, I was talking about my teaching experiences and what made me qualified, and just inserting, BT dubs, I'm gay, that just felt really awkward. So it just never really came up. I think when I talked about my social project that I was interested in, I alluded to wanting to volunteer with the queer organization in Bogota, but it just really never came up. I think it's one thing when you're making that decision, one, you should only do it if you feel safe doing it. And two, I would only recommend mentioning it if it feels relevant, but not because you should not mention it because you want to hide it, but you should only mention it if it's central to the actual essay. If you're just entering it in for brownie points, for lack of a better word, I think that one, it's going to be ineffective, and two, it's going to make your essays sound very clunky. I would say trust in your experiences, trust in what you've done leading up to this point. And if being queer and identifying with this community is relevant to that story, by all means, capitalize on that in your essays.
Great advice. Thanks, Chris. And that's actually something that we spoke as panelists. Interesting that came up, like I said, the session that we had to prepare for the conference. So if Ben or Manny, if either one of you want to answer the same question.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything Christopher said. I don't remember mentioning it in my application. So do you think there is like usually like checkbox of like your identity, and like sometimes like I definitely do because I'm like I have nothing to hide here, like so I tend to check those boxes, but unless it felt necessary, I haven't mentioned it in my essays or like capitalized on it, because it's just I think with the Gilman application, like it was just not necessarily, I think the essays didn't really ask about like your identity in that way. So yeah, that I would probably advise very similar to Chris, unless it feels part of your story at the time when you're writing your essays. I would include it, otherwise, I don't know.
Okay, great. Thanks, Manny. And then Ben, if you just had something to add to that, feel free.
Sure. I was just going to say that I was very open in my application materials, just like in the personal kind of the personal narrative that I was telling was very much related to my sexuality. So then like in the project I was proposing, I used like like pop culture references that were very queer. So like it was very, if it fits, I agree with Chris, like if it fits with what you're saying about yourself, do it. But if it feels like in any way like superfluous or whatever, don't include it. But I also wanted to share that like something that I mentioned also in our pre-session is that when I got accepted to the program, I emailed the commission saying like, I am gay. I was just very like, but now that I'm telling the whole story, I realized, but I emailed them and I said, I'm telling you this because I have this like safety concern, like Brazil is, has a lot of violence against LGBT people, like, etc. And they were super like, okay, yeah, we'll see what we can do. I was like, I've lived in other places before. I know that it's not, I know where it's perfect, but I think there's also like a lot of times in these programs, we like forget the human element. Like the people there, like if you're accepted into these programs, they want to help you. And like, generally, I'm generalizing, but like to like find space for that human connection as well and be like, this is what I'm worried about. What can I do? So that's my long answer.
If I could add an addendum to what Ben just shared, I think it's important to also consider what, if you're feeling inside of you this kind of tingle about going to a certain place, I always try to encourage people to think, imagine for people who are applying to Fulbright in the US, imagine what they might be thinking about in terms of safety, considering like the mess that we have going on in this country. Like imagine someone living in Colombia looking at like blatant Latinx racism in the United States and thinking, is this somewhere where I would go? I've experienced more. I remember I was on the subway the other day and I like stood up for someone and this guy like threatened me and he called me. It's kind of funny. He called me. He was like, am I looking at gay Malcolm X? I thought it was really, really funny. But like I've experienced more discomfort here surrounding my queer identity in the US and growing up than I ever did in Colombia. So I do think I think safety is definitely number one, and you should for sure think about it and talk to people who are in the country, but also try to think, not to, sound like I'm gaslighting anyone at all, but trying to think about like, what is it that's making you uncomfortable? And is it something specific to the country? I think that that's always very key to think about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that like I felt way more like, I felt that my experience in Brazil was similar in that way, that I didn't feel that like pressure or any hostility or anything like that. I felt that way more here in the US. I think what I was hoping to do when I communicated, when I talked to the Fulbright program, when I got accepted, was like just like putting out, this is my wish list, basically. Like, ideally, if you could put me in a place where I'm not in the middle of nowhere, where I'm not like cut off from a larger, and that's like the benefit of being in an urban space, is that there are just more people, so that there are likely more people you can connect with. So, but yes, I agree that there are things where it's you shouldn't have like an automatic, oh, it's going to be worse abroad because you know, it ignores the reality here too. So yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you all. So I know we have a few more minutes left. Our session ends here in about 7 minutes. I think we have some more questions in the Q&A. So I'm gonna, yeah, Omar saying yes, I'm gonna pass it off to Omar to ask those questions of our panelists.
Cool, yeah, so there's another question. I know that, again, Chris answered it. Actually, no, well, guys, maybe we'll go to one that Chris has not answered yet. And then if you all want, you can click on the Q&A and you can answer them, the speakers as well. Just kidding. The other ones are all comments. We're gonna go back to the question that Chris already answered. Sorry, guys. So there's a question. Did you all apply to your first choice country or region? I'm curious if you initially wanted to go somewhere else and decided it might not be as safe in the end. Did you pivot at all? And what was your experience in making that choice? I think this is like a good question to put on the front, on the spot.
I can go quickly. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Ben. I think I definitely had applied to Gelman before I took my grant to Hungary, and I had applied to study abroad in France. But I actually did not end up completing that program. And it was just like, it didn't end up working out academically, or something came up. And so then I settled, but it was totally worth it to go to Hungary and study in Budapest. And I don't think I made those decisions based on like whether it'd be safer in one place or the other. And I probably should have been more considerate about that. But I think I had made those decisions. And I knew that Budapest, like, because it was the city that was going through a lot, but was still a pretty, like, things were happening. You don't necessarily feel unsafe. I knew it was still like a place I totally would feel comfortable in.
Okay.
I was just going to say that yeah, Brazil was my first choice, and I think that was, yeah. What was there was another part of the question, but
let me read it out for you. It's I think I think both of you answered it. Did you pivot at all, and what was your experience in making that decision? I think it was more focused on safety, though, the question, but you can also take it in however you want.
No, I guess we had a weird situation in our program where they needed to bring people back for another year just because of a weird admissions thing. So it kind of impacted my decision to like stay on, just be like, this is a place, if I hadn't felt safe there, I would have left, obviously. So yeah, I guess that in that sense, it was like affirming. I don't know if that answers it, but yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I think that answers it.
Hey,
and
Ben,
I think that
if I chime in just for 1 second on this
Yeah.
question. Don't apply to a place that's not going to be safe for you if you think that it's not going to be safe for you. I went to the Middle East, the very different experiences from everybody here. Just keep in mind, I'm not going to answer the question beyond really take into consideration like what your comfort level is with your sexual orientation, right? Like if you can't navigate being straight passing, and maybe that this is a question the panelists can also talk about, like passing privileges in certain areas, it would be a lot, like it's pertinent to you to consider that question for yourself. On how much you can pass where you're going and how that's going to affect your safety.
Exactly. Thank you, Omar. And I would even jump in to say how much straight passing is going to potentially affect your mental health, and whether that is something that you would even entertain doing, if it's worth it for you in the long run. I'd jump on and say that. But okay, so we're sort of running out of time. I know Chris has left his information in the chat there for all of you to contact if you have any questions or comments. Ben saying that he'll add his too. So if you have any further questions or comments for the panelists, you can go ahead and contact them there. Other than that, we just have a few more minutes for the session. Yeah.
I just want to say while I'm typing my contact info in here, I think what Omar said is so true. There is a lot of like everywhere is so different, and you really have to know for yourself what that, and like you mentioned too, like you have to know what how many energy points you have per day to like do what you need to do. And I think that like you'll find that like that who you are in your academic space and who you are in your off-campus space, and like all these things you'll come to understand. But yes, I think before you go, that's super important to consider. So I snaps to Omar for bringing that up.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Omar. And then there's Ben's information there in the chat box for everyone as well. Yep, and just as Omar said, all questions are going to be answered in the Q&A box from now on, and our session is going to end here in about a few minutes. There will be a short survey that you all will receive afterwards, so please fill out the survey. Let us know what you think of the conference, and just complete that survey to your best of your ability. Thank you so much for getting in or following the session, being here with us today. Manny has also dropped her information there in the chat box. So definitely reach out to our panelists. They're here to talk to you. They're here to be a resource for you on a many different levels. And again, thanks for joining our session. I'm getting told again, don't forget, there's a 1-minute survey afterwards. If y'all could complete that, that would be really helpful. Other than that, we are, I think, just about finished on the session. I think time is up. Again, thanks panelists. Thank you, Omar, for being a great assistant. And thank you to the We Represent conference team for organizing this and making this a really safe space and a good informational, educational session and everything that that the conference has to offer.